the US national debt is $36 trillion. By the time you watch this, it might have already hit $37 trillion. Isn't that way too much? And is it a ticking time bomb? According to a report from the IMF, the US national debt is indeed a massive financial time bomb and could potentially be the most severe in history. You can support this video with info at the Q on this post, or you can easily support the Science Money Monster channel by simply subscribing. For those of you watching, honestly, you don't have to subscribe for every single episode. And if you haven't subscribed yet, just hit that button once, and that's enough. Thank you. Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP came out and said that we're going to see the collapse of the US bond market, okay? If the US debt problem isn't resolved, the US debt to GDP ratio has already surpassed 120% for quite some time now. Now, that 120% debt to GDP ratio might not sound all that alarming yet because they make a ton of money, right? And that 120% isn't even the highest in the world. Okay, the ratio isn't number one. But if we're talking about the actual amount of money, $36 trillion and counting, increasing every second like this, the United States easily takes the top spot as the world's biggest debtor. Just how big is $36 trillion? It's so huge that even if you combine the GDPs of the world's 5 major powers, it still doesn't match America's debt. China's GDP, for example, is $17.7 trillion. Japan's GDP is $4.2 trillion. India's GDP is $3.9 trillion. The UK's GDP is $3.5 trillion. Germany's is $4.5 trillion. So if you add up the GDPs of these 5 major countries, their combined income is only $33.8 trillion, still less than America's debt. So the next question is, why does the United States have so much debt? Is there a crisis? Is there an emergency? Is there some kind of problem in the United States? Because if you look at the graph, the amount of debt the US has right now proportionally is even higher than during World War II or during COVID, when there was both a war and a pandemic. With the US debt being this high, if anyone still says it's not scary, well, it is scary. And what about the alarm bells? They're ringing loud and clear. From Moody's, the credit rating agency that just downgraded the US credit rating. This move has made people all over the world clutch their chests in concern. And let's keep holding our breath to see if the United States will create the Great Recession Series Part 3. But first, let's take a look at the US national debt. As of the time I'm recording this, the US national debt stands at $36.9 trillion. The debt burden per taxpayer, this doesn't count people who don't pay taxes. The debt burden per taxpayer is $323,000. So while each taxpayer is carrying a debt burden of over $300,000, the average savings per person is only about $300. Wow. So what options do we have? And what I just mentioned is only the public debt, or the debt incurred by the government. If we include household debt and private company debt as well, the United States has a total debt of $104 trillion. With such a massive amount of debt, it inevitably comes with the burden of interest payments. As a result, the United States has to pay $5.4 trillion in interest every year. At this rate, the US could probably just make payments and buy the sun for itself. So let's take a look at why the United States has so much debt. If I were to just have fun and analyze it in a straightforward way, I'd say, oh, the US has this much debt because it spends more than it earns. Wow, that sounds really boring, right? I mean, who would even have debt if they didn't spend more than they made, right? But let's dig a little deeper and see exactly what those expenses that exceed their income are actually spent on. Let's start with taxes and tax collection, because the United States has had problems with tax collection for a long time. The US has cut taxes several times already, and while that might sound good, like lowering taxes would stimulate consumption and boost the economy, in reality, it hasn't worked. In the long run, the numbers make that very clear. So let's take a look at who actually benefits from these tax cuts, considering that taxes are one of the government's main sources of income. Looking at this chart, based on data from ITEP analysis, the poorest 20% of the country, that is, the homeless, the unemployed, only receive 3% of the benefits from tax cuts. The next poorest 20%, which includes people with low incomes, get just 7% of the benefits from tax cuts. The next 20%, which you could call the middle class, like office workers and salaried employees, receive only 9% of the benefits from tax cuts. The next 20% are what you'd call the upper middle class, people who are a bit wealthier than the regular middle class. They get 16% of the benefits from tax cuts, which is a pretty substantial amount. And then the richest 20% of the country, including the so-called 1%, the country's billionaires and ultra-wealthy, receive a combined total of 65% of the benefits from tax cuts. The people who benefit from tax cuts are folks like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and so on, which means that the wealthiest 20% in the United States are the group that gains the most from tax rate reductions, more than all the other classes combined. These kinds of tax cuts, supposedly to stimulate the economy, come from a theory called Trickle Down Economics. It's the belief that if you give tax benefits to the rich, then once the rich make more and more profit, right, the money will supposedly trickle down to employees and workers on its own. But it doesn't actually work like that. Trickle-down economics ends up creating even more class disparity. The wealthy, who get the benefits, just keep getting richer, while the poor, who are supposed to get money trickling down from the rich, don't actually get it. So the gap just keeps widening. There's an interesting index that measures the difference between the rich and the poor in the US. It's called the Gini coefficient among US full-time workers. This chart shows the class disparity between the poor and the rich in the United States, illustrating just how big the income gap is. The way to read this chart is, if the value is at 0, it means everyone is equal, living in a utopia, perfectly happy and peaceful. But if it goes up to 1, that means the class disparity is at its absolute highest. This chart shows that since 1990, the class gap has, in the United States, the income gap has been getting wider and wider, and it keeps increasing. Now, as the rich keep getting richer, partly due to tax benefits they receive, the wealthy actually pay a smaller proportion of taxes. This means the government can't really collect substantial, meaningful tax revenue from those who have the highest incomes in the country. Instead, the government ends up collecting taxes from office workers, regular jobs, people earning monthly salaries. Basically, you don't have enough money to invest in building factories or anything like that, so the government doesn't get any extra benefit from you. You just pay your taxes. That's why the tax revenue collected by the US government isn't actually that high. Meanwhile, government expenses, which are shown by the green line, just keep going up and up, while the red line, which represents the government's revenue from taxes, which is the main source of government income, keeps getting lower and lower. The real problem is that the gap between these two lines, the green one for expenses and the red one for revenue, is getting wider and wider, and it looks like it's only going to keep growing. That widening gap is the real issue, and you can't just leave it like that. The quickest, though roughest way to deal with this gap is to borrow money. So the US just keeps borrowing, which is why the national debt has ballooned to $36 trillion. And when you borrow a ton of money like that, you get a little extra bonus, interest. The US now has to pay at least $1 trillion a year just in interest. And the more the government's revenue drops, the less tax they collect, but their expenses keep going up, so they have to borrow even more, which means even more interest. This just makes the government's spending go up even higher, leading to an even bigger budget deficit. And that gap we talked about, it just keeps getting wider and wider. And when they try to find ways to deal with this massive budget gap, it always comes back to the same old rough solution: just borrow even more. This cycle has been going on for decades, leading to a mountain of debt that the IMF calls a financial nuclear bomb, saying it could be the most severe in history. But some people might start to think, hey, is the US really in trouble because of all this borrowing? Because honestly, America is really good at printing money, and it seems like they can print as much as they want. But the US actually has laws about this. they borrow money too, They have a debt ceiling law that says the United States can borrow money, but not beyond a certain limit. If they borrow so much that they hit the debt ceiling, they can't borrow anymore. And that could lead to a government shutdown or even a default, right? But don't worry. Don't stress about the US hitting the debt ceiling because, yes, the US does have a law about not exceeding the debt ceiling, but honestly, that law is kind of just for show because since 1960 in the United States, I don't even know why they have a debt ceiling law because they've already raised the debt ceiling 78 times. What? Oh, Thailand is also thinking about raising its debt ceiling. A country with transparency is a country with a high ceiling. But the problem is, okay, the United States can raise the debt ceiling as much as it wants, as many times as it wants. That's true. The US, running a budget deficit, just borrow more. Yeah, they can issue as many US government bonds as they want, borrow as much as they want. That's true. But the people who are willing want to let the US borrow as much as it wants, that part is starting to not be true anymore. Look at where people are starting to not really want US government bonds and don't really want to be America's creditor. Look here at the bond yield, the return from US government bonds. For example, the 30-year bond right now is yielding 5%. That's really high because the global economy, it's not good. What asset can you buy and get 5% interest? Treasuries. That's what. No one else offers that, but America can. It sounds like a bad joke. People ask, where can you get a decent rate? Just put it in America. You'll get 5% guaranteed. But for high quality assets, would they really pay that much? Why is it that treasuries? The higher the yield that the government offers, the higher the yield goes, the more it actually means the value of the bonds themselves is collapsing. Because today, US government bonds are not only no longer seen as a safe haven or a truly secure asset, but they're even being viewed as risky assets with the possibility of default or the US failing to pay its debts. That's why so many countries are now collectively selling off US government bonds. So, when investors aren't really interested in US government bonds, the government has to offer higher returns. Most recently, Moody's, one of the world's major credit rating agencies, officially lowered the credit rating of US government bonds from AAA to AA1. The problem with a lower credit rating is that it means higher borrowing costs. They have to offer more attractive interest rates. And Moody's downgrade has also triggered S&K are selling America again, and so the vicious debt cycle of the US looks like this. They issue bonds, but people aren't really interested, so borrowing interest rates go up. The US ends up with even more debt, and because of that, they have to borrow even more money. When they borrow more, they issue even more bonds. But as people start to lose interest rates climb even higher. This leads to even greater government expenses, and it just keeps going on and on. Now, let's suppose, though we don't really know if this will actually happen or not, but let's say that US government bonds really do collapse. What would happen then? The answer is just look at where US government bonds are held, which banks have them, which central banks have them on their balance sheets, which financial institutions are holding them. Those are all the places that would be affected. They would all come crashing down together. And what has the US dollar been throughout all these years, Patty? It's the world's primary reserve currency. This is the financial nuclear bomb that could come from US debt. The IMF has said that if it collapses this time, it would be the most catastrophic financial collapse in world history.